Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Open Discussion Podcast. I have a very special guest with me here today. The 16th SMA Grinston, 36 years of outstanding military service, serving in every leadership position from enlist all the way up to the SMA, multiple combat deployments. I'm not even going to count the PCS move for SMA. You probably PCS 200 times, but we can keep that classified for now. But I'm very happy to have you on the show today, SMA. I really appreciate you. I'm a little bit biased because a friend of mine asked me yesterday. I told him I was going to be interviewing, in my opinion, the best SMA we had. I'm just biased because I'm a 13 Bravo myself. So for the folks out there, just want to put that out there. So SMA, I appreciate you for taking time out of your schedule to be here today. I really appreciate you.
No, thanks for having me, and I look forward to the discussion. It's going to be great. And
Oh,
thanks for the props on the best SMA you've ever had.
This is my squad. I can't forget that. I appreciate you. For me, SMA, in terms of
Yeah,
my decision to serve, I think was one of the best decisions that I made to serve the U.S. military, just because of where I came from, my background, and my way to get back. And through my service and what the service provided for me was the lifestyle that I have now, the friends that I've made, the folks that I stay in contact with, but most importantly, what the service taught me as a man, as a leader, as a family man, and just the folks that I came in contact with. So I owe the military a lot, and I know you probably expressed the same sentiment. So just want to get right into it. We all have a different motivation to serve and different reason why we serve. But I'd like to know from you, what was your motivation? What encouraged you to say, I'm going to serve my country? And 36 years later, yeah, we are.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes I would question, like, why did I serve 36 years? So it was a long time. But I'm be honest with you. I guess in my hometown, most of the people kind of did something. You had one of my friends was National Guard soldier. One of my friends wanted me to go in the Navy. We were supposed to be Navy SEALs, and then eventually, I ended up joining the Army. So there was a big calling, to service. We weren't allergic to it. It was something very natural. We had a lot of friends that did it. But for me, the biggest one is I really thought I could do something. I wanted to finish my college, and the Army offered, a lot of money to do a college degree. But so that's kind of the reason I joined. We had everybody, all of us as young men, we had this, calling to do something, serve, or go to school. And it wasn't a bad. It was never looked on poorly. Uh, it was very common to have people, join the military out of my hometown. So that was there. But the real question really is like, why did I stay that long? And, because I didn't know a lot about the Army. So I joined, and then I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with this sense of helping other people around the world. And then just helping soldiers get through tough times. And I just kept getting these really good jobs where I thought I could make a difference in the world, and I kept staying, and I just got more responsibility to do something different to make the world a better place, whether in the Army or outside, those outside the Army. And I kept staying, and it was really cool. And I'm really proud of serving for that long. I didn't think I would do it. I thought I'd do like 2 years and get out, but it was amazing, and I wouldn't change a thing.
I appreciate you, SMA. I think for those of us that served during your term as the CSM, the SMA, we appreciate you. You were very accessible. I think so many occasions you came different installation, different places. You was always out there in the field, putting out what the Army vision was, what you're trying to accomplish, what direction the Army you believe should be going. But just want to go back from the beginning, if you don't mind. I think a soldier first duty station can have a profound impact on them. If you can still recall, when you first got to your duty station, different times, right? Because I came in '98. When I came through, there was no sponsorship program, right? I showed up and back at Fort Sill, my section chief grabbed me, said, "Come on, let's go." But the condition for which that was created, provided me a different outlook on the military because, as you stated earlier, we have no idea what to expect. So, what was it for you for your first assignment when you first got to the organization? I don't know if they had replacement back then or what's going on, but how were you received and how you think that impacted you?
Well, you thought it was bad in '98. You should come in '88.
Oh man.
In, in '88, there was like, hey, there's your unit. Good luck. I think probably the biggest thing that influenced probably my first duty station, believe it or not, was the drill sergeant and being, going basic training and OSUT really at Fort Sill. Um, you know, and here's what most people don't realize when you look at, you'll never see this in my bio, but for whatever reason, the entire time I was the platoon guide in basic training through OSUT, through all of
Mm.
them. I was the only one. And, it's pretty rare because usually get fired as a platoon guy. And so what most people have no clue on what that is, platoon guy is the person that the drill sergeants pick to kind of be like the student body leader for basic training in AIT. So I did that for like 13 weeks. So I had this, here's your leadership position. And then I get to my first duty station and I got used to that, being a role model and getting people to where they need to go. Sometimes even a platoon guide would ask to train people. So when I got to my first duty station, I just kept going with what I just learned in basic training and AIT or OSUT at the time. So when I got to that duty station, I had a lot of my friends. Now the weird part is they knew me as a platoon guide too. So we all went to basic training together. So even when I got there, they're like, well, who's in charge? Well, he is because he was
He
there for
is.
basic training the whole time. But we had some good leaders. You still had some leaders from Vietnam there, but I just my foundation for that first duty station, I'll be honest, really was a carryover from basic training at AIT and OSUT. So when I got there was no reception. They asked, here's how they pick what unit. It's like, well, do you want to go to Alpha or Service Battery? And I'm like, I don't know what you're
I don't know
talking
the
about.
difference.
So, and I think they're just like, here, you go to that unit. And I'm like, okay, great. And I loved my first duty assignment. I had a great time. It was a great location. I felt like I could do more in the Army. I think I had, I wanted to do more as a leader in the Army. And I don't think I had like great leaders above me, but I thought maybe I could be one of those leaders. And I even told somebody the other day, they were talking about leadership. I said, I had a couple examples of not great leaders or they were okay or even bad leaders. So what I said to them is like, be the leader that you always wanted to. And that's kind of what my narrative was. I wanted to be the leader that I wish I had because I didn't have it in my first duty
And
station.
you just brought up something we all discussed, just the issue of leadership from the non-commissioned officer standpoint. I think we both can agree at every position you serve as a enlisted from, from a junior non-commissioned officer to a senior non-commissioned officer, all the way up to the nominated level is different level of responsibility and different things you have to focus on. So you being the senior non-commissioned officer in the Army at the time, as you push the Army in terms of vision, how will you describe, right, from when you came in as far as a non-commissioned officer corps when you came in back in 1822? Oh, sorry, Simon. In 18, well, back in
Yeah,
the...
we still have muskets. Yeah, I got it.
So how would you describe as far as a non-commissioned officer corps as a body in terms of from the junior all the way up to the senior during that time you came in to where the 90s doing this for us and then 2000 because back 2001 to 3 doing Afghanistan Iraq operation things changed a lot, folks getting promoted pretty fast, and then now to where post combat operation, mean active combat operations, as you look across the spectrum in terms of just the Army overall, how would you describe the non-commissioned officer corps in terms of leadership, and what are some things you think that help us to be a better non-commissioned officer corps in terms of the leadership, just the leaders we have overall?
Yeah. Um, how would I describe it? I actually, believe it or not, this is actually a discussion I had with the Secretary of Defense a few years ago when I was the Sergeant Major of the Army. So we're all in this little room, and imagine you've got every service in there. You've got Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, and the head of all their services sitting with the Secretary of Defense, and then all their senior enlisted. And I can't remember exactly what got us on this topic. And I said, um, for overtime, it's actually pay, right? For a long time, you had this pay. You had enlisted here, you had officers here, and then the pay scale, it always, just said, well, you get 10%. If you make more, then you get more pay, and then overtime, you get more pay, right? But it was a blanket. You get 10%. Well, if you started with more money, you're getting a 10% raise, and
Mm-hmm.
your pay gap just got bigger and bigger. And I go, well, that's part of the problem with the pay scale. And then believe it or not, the Space Force guy says, yeah, but the responsibilities did like this. So the pay went like this, responsibilities went like that. So in 1988, you probably didn't have, a sergeant major that said, hey, I'm going to train the Iraqi army, um, like all of it. Like what? Like all of them. Like, who's going to do that? So, but in 2014, General Funk turned to me as the division sergeant major and said, hey, what are you going to do for training for Iraqis? I'm like, nothing. So, like, what are you talking about? He goes, you should probably train them. Like, develop this plan to train the Iraqi army. I'm like, okay, great, sure. I said, we left all our training folks back at Fort Riley. He's like, yeah, but you'll figure it out. So I did. Most people didn't really believe it, that like I would have these training meetings. I had each training site. At the time you had Besmaya, you had Taji, and you had Al Assad. And every one of those training sites were led by a colonel. But at the headquarters, I was the person leading the training.
The training.
And they were like, what? Like, it can't be a sergeant major up there. I was like, hey, man, I was given this task. I understand this is probably going to make other services or other countries uncomfortable, but this is what you got to deal with. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's the task I was given. I just don't think we did that, 1988, probably 1998, where you had these huge responsibilities on our NCOs, and you can look it up. You can go find somebody. You probably have to talk to somebody in Iraq, but the training development plan that was written originally was done by the leadership of like a couple NCOs in the headquarters of First ID. Um, and I was the lead one for that. So those responsibilities were just incredible. And it's so awkward that most people don't believe me.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
So we went back. I still remember I went back to Iraq as a force com, and they took me to Taji, and they wanted to show me how they built this area and how they brought the equipment in, and they were telling me all about this stuff. And I go, I know everything about this location. Like, what do you mean? I was like, I was here when we reopened it, and everything that you were telling me was the plan that literally either I wrote or we wrote in the headquarters and I approved like 2 years earlier. So, but most people like, there's no, yeah, sure you did, Sergeant Major. Like, they don't even believe it. It's like, okay, I don't know what to tell you, man. But one thing I think we missed though, when we talk about that, is the faith that the Army officers have in our NCO Corps to give them that task. So we always like to talk about the NCOs, but we actually forget the piece where General Funk trusted me enough to tell me I could do that, and then he let me do it. So I think it's the second piece of that is you've got to have an officer corps that's willing to take that risk and trust you enough to get it done. And I think other services in other countries don't have, the officer corps don't have that same trust in their NCOs. And I would even say other services. And not that they're not all great, because we have the greatest military in the world, but specifically in the Army, there is a lot of faith in the non-commissioned officers, and we get that from our officers corps, where they'll just give us this task that other people would either give colonels or lieutenant colonels, and we give it to a first sergeant or a sergeant major.
That's going to be my follow-on discussion, really, the relationship between the non-commissioned officer corps and the officer in terms of at the command structure level, right? Because sometimes we take it for granted for folks who don't understand that unique relationship between that commander and that CSM. If we can just talk about the CSM, if you don't mind, if you don't mind, how important, how critical it is, because you talk about how those officers empower those NCO, but it comes with a certain level of competency, right? You have to be competent for that officer to trust in you to give you those tasks for which he or she want you to over accomplish. How is it important for Sergeant Major at the battalion all the way up to the nominal level to understand that relationship? I know a couple of years ago, I think I read in 600-20, the Army Command Policy. It talks about the roles and responsibilities of the CSM, whatever the case may be. But do you think the CSM role, I mean, it's different, of course, at different level of command? Advise and, provide advice to the overall commander. I mean, we all fully understand that. But how important is that relationship? How important it is to be a respectful relationship between our command and our command sergeant major? CSM understand his or her role as far as have the capacity to implement that commander's vision, and what should be their primary for in terms of providing that vision to the formation.
Yeah. Well, here's what the biggest advice I would give a battalion or a brigade sergeant major is normally your battalion's mission, like your field artillery, infantry, so you kind of know the mission, but then there'll be the vision of the commander. And at that level, that's the commander, and what's their vision? You need to look at that and say, okay, here's what the boss told me to do. How do I enhance that? What is my piece in that? And, no, I never would take, some people, what I see sergeant majors fail is like, they're like, yeah, this is what I want to do. Oh, that's awesome. That's not in conjunction with what your boss told you.
You're not a commander.
So yeah, so just, it feels like it's simple, but it's not sometimes, because you come with your own biases, and sometimes you want to do what you want, and that's not what I recommend. It's like here, your boss gives you a little vision, and you look at that, read it, and then you should say, okay, how am I going to enhance that? I'll give you one example. It's a bad example. Is I had a battalion sergeant major, and he came to me, and I was a brigade sergeant major, and he's like, hey, you need to talk to my boss. He'll listen to you. I was like, okay, great. Why do I need to talk to your boss? Well, he wants to do a 34-mile foot march. It's like, okay, great. And he goes, you should talk him out of it. I said, well, you probably should just go start training. It's like, you get ready for that 34-mile foot march. He goes, well, are you going to do it? I said,
It's going to happen.
100% I'm not. I'm not doing it. It's not my boss. It's your boss. So, but his failure was, this is what his boss told him. And instead of, trying to, enhance it and get the whole unit ready to do that, he was trying to get me to convince him not to do it. And it was just wrong. Here's what your boss told you to do. It wasn't illegal, moral. They were the 34th Infantry Regiment. So he wanted to do 34 miles. Figure it out. And don't try to reinvent the wheel. Say, okay, here's how NCOs, I want you to have, 5 miles by this week or 10 miles by this week. We don't need to hurt anybody. And make sure you do this, and this is the route. Report back to me when you've gotten to this level, and here's the day we're going to do it. You do your backward planning on the individual training to get there to the 34 miles. He didn't do any of that. So the biggest thing is take the vision of your boss and then say, how do I help him achieve those goals? And if you disagree with him, go talk to him. But then at the end of the day, if that's what, what he wants or she, execute and then figure out how to do it. A lot of people think everything I did as SMA is something I wanted to do. And it's just wrong. It's just not true. I had guidance from the secretary and the chief. But when I walked out, you thought I owned every bit of it. And I did. That's right. I mean, you'll probably never get me to even agree what, some things I disagree with. And that's 2 years ago, and I still don't talk about it. Because I call that leadership. So you take your boss's guidance and then you enhance it. And I think that applies in any job you would do. I've seen so many people try to fight it And it's just good, they're fighting just because they didn't like it. It's like, okay, I appreciate it, but I do a lot of things I don't necessarily want to do. It's just because it's what the nation requires sometimes. And I see a lot of sergeant majors fail because of that. A lot of leaders fail because they're not listening to the guidance that their boss gave.
Yeah, you just talk about, I don't want to use the term conflict resolution, right? Because conflict is going to exist in terms of disagreement or just for some reason, difference of opinion. And I do believe as a non-commissioned officer, as you stated, if you have a disagreement or something, you have a different recommendation, different idea, to have that discussion with the boss in his or her office. You guys can have that discussion. So from a conflict resolution standpoint, have you experienced conflict in terms of in the command itself? Because as you go up higher within the command, now you have the big three or the big five, and it overextend. You have folks different opinion. I mean, you're gonna, of course, support the commander's vision, as you stated, as long as it's non-ethical or overall moral. But you have your own things to say and things to add because you're an independent thinker as well. How do you navigate conflict, no matter if within your command suite or at the lower level? And what are some recommendations will you give leaders that are serving both officer and NCO non-commissioned officer? This is how I recommend you go about handling and dealing with conflict, putting some mechanism in place to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think conflict is bad. Some people do, and it's unfortunate. So there are a group of leaders, and I'm not talking about enlisted officers, just leaders sometimes that don't like when people tell you no or something like that. I think that's not healthy. There's always going to be conflict, and conflict is sometimes good, meaning you need to have people around you to go, hey, that's not right, or you shouldn't do that. And even as the sergeant major of the army, you didn't want everybody's like, oh, that's a great idea. That's like, it's the dumbest thing I ever heard. So conflict is needs to always exist, in my opinion, even from leader to subordinate or subordinate to leader. And that just means we have a culture that says, if I disagree with something, I can bring it to you. Where you have that culture that there is no conflict and everybody just agrees, I just think that's you know something in a fairy tale book. People are disagreeing with you, but you haven't created a culture that allows them that they trust you enough to voice a different opinion because the fear of reprisal, being fired, or you're going to hold it against them. So first of all, I'd say conflict is not bad. It's just conflict. Conflict is going to always exist to resolve a problem. Um, Now, after you kind of said your piece, y'all, go through whatever that conflict is. But when you walk out, first of all, you got to have a culture that says, I can disagree with my boss. And I advise every leader to have a culture that says you can do that. And then number two, on the other side of that, if you have a boss and you disagree and you don't say anything, then I think that's your fault. Um, Even if there is an environment where you're not supposed to, this is expectation. You always got to, oh, you don't want to, disagree with your boss openly. I'm like, well, don't ask me a question openly then, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. So sometimes, you got to have that. So conflict's not bad. I think you got to have a culture that says it's okay. Um, but then the whole how do you deal with the conflict is depends on the situation you're in and the environment. You know, if I'm being shot at, now's not the time to say, hey, I'd really like, to take a nap right now. So there's a certain time during a conflict when to bring up a certain point. And others are better than that. So knowing your environment and then when to address a serious conflict. Sometimes it needs to be done right in the middle of a meeting. Sometimes it may be after the meeting. I'll give you an example. So I had a boss, 4-star, um, and we're in a meeting and somebody goes, hey, would you like to do this or something? Briefed him, a colonel briefed him on something. He goes, okay. And after the meeting, I said, hey, did you agree to that? He goes, absolutely not. I said, yeah, but you said okay.
Hmm.
And he's like, I said, that colonel's over there writing it down, man. He's going to execute okay.
Gonna execute.
No, I was just saying like, okay, like I acknowledged it. So that really wasn't a huge conflict, but it was after the meeting. I said, I really, boss, I think that guy said, when you said okay, I think he heard yes, go
Hmm.
execute. Um, and after the meeting, I went to his office and said, I think you should readdress that. And I didn't do it right in the middle of the meeting. So that was a minor conflict. And now, this wasn't a major conflict, but I was in a meeting with secretary, the vice, the chief, and they asked me, and the chief said one thing, and they said, well, Sergeant Major of the Army, what's your opinion? And it was different than the chief of staff of the Army. Um, so that, I guess that was a conflict, but I felt as my job as a Sergeant Major of the Army is to be the voice that may say something that's different with a different opinion than the chief of staff of the Army. That's what my job was to do. Wouldn't just sit there and always agree to him. If he needed that, then you didn't need a Sergeant Major of the Army. You just get rid of the whole position. Um, so there are certain times when you should be able to challenge your boss. It's got to be a culture that that's built on trust, that they don't hold that against you forever. Like, I can't believe he corrected me or said something. You got to get on the plan. And Jim McConnell never said that. He just said, hey, yep, that's a different of opinion. And it was okay because we had a culture that was okay with conflict. Um, and as a leader, I don't think everybody does that. If you're a soldier and you're in an environment that doesn't appreciate culture, then you probably don't want to openly correct anybody. Um, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with that, but if you're a sergeant major, you should understand that sometimes I think that your job is to live in conflict. Um, it's okay to disagree with people. It's not You're not challenging authority. It's just giving a different opinion. But once that opinion's been made, it's time to execute. My personal opinion. Um, just kind of conflict's over. I said my piece. We're going to do the 34-mile foot march. Now we're going to execute. So that's it. Just do it. Some people just sit there and whine about it for another 2 years, and I don't agree with that kind of conflict
That's a good way to put it, right?
resolution.
Just sit there and over complain about it, considering you bringing some recommendation and different options to the commander. Say, so this is what I recommend we do. Some things that we're gonna do to meet the over objectives. Just want to keep talking about the whole thing about leadership. Really, the Army is pretty big on leadership. I mean, I think across all, I think 6 branches, right? If you add Space Force, in terms of leadership, how you think your personally leadership philosophy in terms of how you lead and how you think and how you describe, from not just the organization level, from the strategic level overall. So how did you came about constructing your leadership philosophy? I mean, your core values remains in place. The Army talk about different styles of leadership, right? I do believe all leaders should have the transformation leadership style, no matter what it is, because the organization is going to keep changing as time progresses. How will you describe your leadership philosophy, and was some impact? Who you think had an impact on you to say, okay, I'm going to shape my leadership style, my leadership philosophy in this direction, or this is my leadership philosophy, who I am, how I do things.
Yeah. Well, that's always a dangerous question for me, and I do usually take the advice of my wife. My wife would say, don't filter anything, and don't ever start with, well, that's what I would do. Because my wife's like, "Mm, nobody does that." It's like I don't know, why wouldn't you get up at 4 o'clock and go for a run? It's like, nobody else would normally do that. So I was like, okay. So I would take two. There's two specific people that I looked at that I thought were really good in my career. Number one was First Sergeant Jenkins when I was a young staff sergeant in Germany. He was not the most fittest, NCO I've ever met, but he had this way about him that was, former drill sergeant and could correct people and was a reasonable man of thought, and was a great role model. And he really taught me, how to be a well-disciplined, organized leader. But I'm going to be honest. Before then, I thought I was going to get out of the army. because the rest of them, like, I don't know what everybody else is talking about. None of this is I would have done. Like I said, I got a lot of coaching from my wife. Stop saying that. But first sergeant really showed me, what it meant to show up on time, to hold people accountable, put people in charge that were, good leaders, and then if they made a mistake, correct it, move on, and it's really good. And then the second one was Sergeant Major Redmore. Again, now a little bit differently. This guy was exceptionally fit, a combat leader, and wicked smart, and would hold people accountable like he held himself accountable. He was a fit, disciplined leader, and one of the smartest and sergeant majors I've known in my career. Exceptional, and he was a role model of how to do things the right way, and he held leaders accountable. And if they didn't live up to the expectations, like, I want you to do this, this, and this, believe it or not, you weren't working for him. You're fired. You want to call it whatever it was. It's like, okay, you didn't do that. You didn't execute this, this, and this. You need to go. And then that's kind of how he gave me a first sergeant job. It's like, okay, he goes, you're in charge tomorrow. I was like, tomorrow, like tomorrow. He's like, yeah, tomorrow. I was like, okay, good, I guess. But he held people accountable, and if they didn't meet the directives that he given from the boss, or the intent that he had, and he held you accountable, you couldn't be there. And he was very clear, and he articulated that very well. And then going back to how that shaped me is, I just thought the same thing. I wanted to be, I want to set the example for everybody, both physically and mentally. A lot of people miss the mentally part. They just see, oh, you're out there doing a run. But what they didn't see is all the times I went to college classes at night when I was a staff sergeant, first class, when I took books to the field when I was a first sergeant. And I was constantly reading two things: studying to get my degree and reading Army doctrine. I think by 20 years, it felt like I'd read every Army manual at least 5 times. It's like, I felt like I'd memorized everything. So a lot of people forget the mental capacity of being a great leader is reading, thoughtfulness, and that emotional intelligence to see what's going on in front of you and see the emotion in people, their faces. And I think that's a thing a lot of leaders miss, especially sergeant majors. I'll give you an example. So you're a battalion sergeant major, and you tell your battalion commander something, and he goes, you're like, hey, I want to move, first platoon to this area, and I want to get all the people ready. And your boss goes, okay, sergeant major. Yeah, that emotional intelligence says, he just told you, please don't do that.
I was saying it, right?
And you never picked up. Yeah, but you never picked up on it. So you did all those things, and then when it all went badly, he's like, yeah, I never wanted you to do that in the first place. And most people say, well, it's the battalion commander's fault. I said, nope, it was your fault because you didn't have the emotional intelligence to see that leader was uncomfortable with what you just said. They have it on their faces. They'll have it in their emotions, the way they sit. And I think in your leadership styles, as crazy as it sounds, is that you have to have, there's a physical capacity, but most people screw up and they don't reach the highest ranks, is that they're not good at the mental capacity of the job and the requirements that it takes. And the second subcategory of that mental capacity is that emotional intelligence. If you're going to be a great sergeant major of the Army, in my personal opinion, you better be high on the scale in emotional intelligence, because everybody around you is going to try to sugarcoat everything they say, and you have to pick up on all the little cues on what people are trying to say you, and they'll tell you, and they won't do any of it with words.
Thanks for sharing that, SMA. I appreciate you. So there's no, in terms of playbook, right? This is the blueprint to become SMA. Coming up, you go to the promotion board, and first sergeant commander that, sergeant major asks, where you see yourself in 10, 50 years? I want to be the SMA. We all says that. So what coming up in the military, is that something you aspire? You say, I want to be the SMA. And what was your glad path to get there, right? Because you went your entire ranks, as far as second chief, platoon sergeant, smoke man, first sergeant, battalion, brigade, corps, force combat, up all the way up to the SMA. I mean, you don't have no as far as this is my play, but what advice or what recommendation would you give to someone who is aspiring to be the SMA?
Yeah. I will always tell them the exact same thing. Whatever you do, don't try to be the sergeant major of the army.
Oh, you
And
got
most
to
people are
break
like,
that down,
what?
SMA. You got to break that down.
Yeah, no, they're like, what do you mean by
What do
that?
you mean by that? You got to break that down for me.
I tell it, I, 100% every time you hear me talk about this, I'll say, don't try to be the sergeant major of the army. I'll use the example, and if you've been around me, probably a year, you've heard this story. But I've said it so many times, but I'll tell you again because you probably haven't heard it. So I was a sergeant, and back in the 1822s, pay problems were done at the S1. So they'd fill out the form, they'd do all the paperwork, they'd fix your pay in the S1 shop. Wasn't online. That soldier, he'd fill out paperwork, pay was all messed up, fill out the paperwork, pay was messed up. So finally I'd had it. I went to the S1 shop. I said, I'm not leaving till you fill out the paperwork the right way and you fix his pay. And they said, you need to leave, have a pack slip or whatever. I don't know what they told me. And I said, I'm not leaving. And I looked and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. The only way you're going to leave, you got one of two ways. You're going to fix this pay problem, or all of you in the S1 can physically remove. And I'm sure that's going to end real poorly for somebody in the S1 shop. And they were like, so they're like, okay, let's go get the sergeant first class.
Yeah.
Like that'll do it, So the sergeant first
class
class comes out. I was a sergeant. I was an E5 sergeant, and sergeant first class comes out. So Sergeant Grinston, you need to leave. I said, I'm going to say this one more time. You got options. Your options are fix his pay problem, or you can physically remove me right now. And you probably should call the MPs because it's going to hurt. Like I'm going to hurt somebody. Or you could just do the paperwork. So believe it or not, the S1 shop chose to do the paperwork. And like, how do you say that with that? If you're trying to be the sergeant major of the army, you're not willing to do that. I was willing to go to jail for my soldiers to fix that pay problem. And at every level, I had that same passion. I think the only reason I got to had a chance is because, as mean as I was, because I was really mean, that my soldiers knew that I would either die for them or go to jail for them. Now, I was also the one that made them run 10 miles at a 6-minute mile pace, but
I heard all the stories. I heard all the stories.
So, yeah, there's a lot of stories about running, but yeah, but the stories were never that story about what the passion that I had for all those soldiers. And I had that passion no matter what. And when I say, everybody wants this blueprint to get up here, but I was willing to never get there if you took care of my people. And that's a risk that I think if you're trying to get to a certain level that quickly, you may not be willing to say what's right in the room when it needs to be said, because you may make somebody mad. You won't be willing to take care of your soldiers to get court-martialed for it, because they could have called my bluff in that S1 shop. Like at every level, I can give you a specific case where I said, I was going to say something that may need to be said that may rub other people wrong in that room. And I get worried if you're trying to make it to a certain level that you're going to do it at the expense of your soldiers. And I would never do that. Am I proud to be the SMA or the former SMA? 100%. I was not willing to ever give up what I thought and believed in my values of what I thought taking care of my soldiers in order to get to that job. I would never sell my soul for that. So when people say, well, it was actually easy when I had a public affairs person because they're like, yeah, he would never do that. I was very consistent. Is that I was always that way. It's like SMA to sergeant. The good news is that when you're that consistent, they can have a narrative. And if
Yeah.
someone's like, "Oh, he said this," it's like, "No, I'm pretty sure he would never do that." So,
Yeah.
I've never seen him do that. But that model is that's what usually worries me is those people are trying to get to that next step. Um, and I'm be honest, I never really thought, I'd be the SMA until I never even thought I had a chance until I was a Corps Sergeant Major. First time other people would say, well, I always knew he'd be the SMA. It was like, there's
Yeah. Yeah.
you and another million people,
How you
right?
know?
You were probably
How
told
you
that.
know?
Everybody was told that, we're all told that. So, but really when I got Corps, somebody said, it was Schroeder, the Force Comp Sergeant Major, said, hey, Sergeant Major Grinston, what do you think you would want to do? I said, well, I'd like to be the Force Comp Sergeant Major, the TRADOC Sergeant Major, or the SMA. Until then, I would be honest with you, I didn't think I'd make it that far. First of all, I didn't think I was going to live past being a first sergeant in combat. So,
Yeah.
um, I thought I would be dead with all the crazy things that happened to me. But um, I just, I just took it one step at a time. And the last thing I forgot, I tell a lot of people, some of this is luck.
Mm.
I mean, I could have got shot, blown up, you know. I mean, I got 5 years of combat, and sometimes I have no clue on how I didn't either die or get something body part missing. I really don't know to this day. God, that's the only thing I can think of. Uh, so those stories are real, but what I'm saying is I could get sick too. You have a knee injury, you just had something. So there's a little bit of this, 30 years, and you got to be healthy. Um, then you got to have that drive. You got to have the mental capacity. And then once you get to a certain level, then let's talk about the SMA. And until you do that and taking care of your people, it's pipe dreams and pixie dust or something.
Thanks a lot, Smith, for sharing that. I tell folks, when I was serving, I said the core essence of leadership, right, is about taking care of the folks that within your responsibility. That's what it comes down to. Let the process play it out. Whatever happens. You do your job. You take care of folks. It's gonna happen.
100%.
It's going to happen. We're going to have to do a whole different segment on just combat operation, just deployment, because
Yep.
folks don't understand not just the physical, stress that comes along with you being deployed, multiple deployment, but just the mental and emotional part that comes along with it. I think, and the Army has done a great job across all branches in terms of resiliency training and behavioral health and so on and so forth. So I think we're going to have to discuss that another time. So you came in, during your time SMA, and now it's time for you to transition. I tell folks, transition is inevitable, right? We all have to experience it. It's up to you to prepare for it or not prepare for it. But the SMA, after 36 years, you're like, all right, it's time for me to transition. How was your transition? Because you currently serve as the CEO over at the AER, doing a wonderful job again for service members and a family member in terms of providing different service, interest loan and grant and scholarship and different other assistance that I know some folks who used it when I was serving. How was your transition from SMA to the current position you're in now? And if you can discuss just a little bit about the AER and what the AER primary goal is, and what you guys trying to accomplish up there. No.
Yeah. Well, my goal, we just worked on our vision. The vision is that at some point in time, you actually don't need AER, says the CEO from Army Emergency Relief. But it is really true is that I really don't want, we want to build this capacity to manage your wealth over time, and that you understand that how to get out of these situations. So you have an emergency fund, you have some insurance, you have savings, you got investments, but that doesn't come in the beginning. Normally, I use myself as an example of that. When I left Jasper, Alabama, I didn't have any money, and some people's like, "Oh, I can't believe I get this all the time as a CEO. It's like, are you incentivizing people to manage their money poorly because they can get loans or assistance from AER? I said, well, not really, because that sounds like somebody that comes from money.
Yeah.
I said, when you come out of Jasper, Alabama, and you don't have any money, and something goes wrong, you don't have any money to
No.
manage. So,
Yeah.
so anything goes wrong, I'm going to need help. I'm either going to get help from a credit card, a loan, or somewhere else. It's interest bearing, payday lender, something. I probably used it all when I was a young soldier.
Hmm.
Um, because I didn't come from that base. I didn't have any money to manage, so I didn't understand that. So my vision for AER is that at certain time, in your career, you never need AER, and then that's the period where you can give back to Army Emergency Relief. So I have this vision that every enlisted gets to a period where they are financially stable. They can absorb emergencies, and they really don't have to work. They work because they want to work. They work because they love the Army, or they're in this position so that you have long-term financial stability and wealth. Um, and you can achieve that being enlisted. I believe that. So that's my vision, is that we teach all the soldiers to do that, and that we are around forever. Is that, and then lastly is I want to help as many people that are struggling as possible, as humanly possible. Um, Now, are we really going to be gone? I think never. I think Army Emergency Relief will be around as long as the Army is going to be around. There's always going to be something that the Army doesn't pay for, the budget doesn't pay for, and soldiers are going to get in a little bit of a bad way, and we're going to be there to help them out, because life happens and it's bad.
Yeah.
It could be we had a family member couldn't pay for cancer treatment, and we helped them out. We had um, houses get hit with hurricanes, and they needed help to repair their houses. I mean, there's all these things that we do. 35,000 soldiers and families got assistance from AER last year. So
Mm.
I think we're going to be around for a long time. But my goal is to, at some point, they will no longer need AER because they have the financial stability that they
I
need.
appreciate it, Sammy. Thanks for sharing that. Before we wrap up here, just want to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. With the exception of Fort Campbell 101st, what would you say was your best assignment?
Well, worldwide, it's going to be Italy. Um, I love being a paratrooper in the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and it wasn't just the location. The people that were there were incredible. I often tell people Major George promoted me to first sergeant,
Mm.
and that's the current chief of staff of the Army. Major Carilla was, I think, in the either battalion or brigade S3 shop, who just about to leave as the CENTCOM commander. Um, Major Rich Clark, who is retired as the SOCOM commander. We're all in Italy at the same time. Scott Burzak, I think, was a staff sergeant, and TJ Holland was a private. so, so I guess all those people did really well. So we had this really great unit that's overseas, and we were it was very challenging because this competition, to be
Yeah.
great was incredible. But just pushed us all to be better. But oh, by the way, and then I get a chance to eat Italian food, scuba diving in the Mediterranean Sea. It's like, so it was like great work, very competitive, paratrooper, and then, oh, by the way, a great location around the world. Um, so that's number one. Number two, inside the U.S., Seattle was a great location, great people, a lot of dedicated soldiers. So I like that. So in the continental U.S., that's probably one of my favorite assignments. And then lastly, I would tell when people ask me this is it doesn't matter. It's where you are. It's great because you're there. Make it the greatest assignment that you've ever had. It doesn't matter if it was Baumholder, Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Drum, New York.
Fort Pope,
They're all
Louisiana.
great because Fort Pope. It's National Training Center, in
Yeah.
NTC. It's in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, it's great
It's
places.
great because you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great because you're there and you make it great. And when people would say I don't like it here, all I thought is they don't like themselves.
Yeah.
Like um, you chose to join the Army. The Army chose to put you there. So bottom line, that's your choice. And when you don't like where you're at in your life, you put yourself there. So it's great because you're there. So it doesn't matter the location. You'll like some better than the others, but they'll all suck if you're mad because you're there.
That's amazing. One thing you could have done differently as SMA.
Could have done differently at SMA. I don't know. I got a ton. So, uh, well, you got to look at the first year versus the last year.
Last year,
My
yeah.
first testimony to my last testimony. The first one was terrible. Last one, I thought it was good. They all got mad at me. But I didn't care. So there was a lot. Every job I learned, even the one now, and we were talking about this morning in a meeting. I said I had to learn how to be the CEO. I read some books. I learned about investing. Because we had a lot of money that we deal with. So I had to read. I had to learn how to do all these things. I had to do that same thing as SMA. So I had to learn. I had to read. I had to figure out how I could help soldiers as the Sergeant Major of the Army, and where were my real roles. And there's not a little book in the corner of the office. It's like, hey, do this. So you have to figure that out a little bit out your own. But I had a lot to learn as SMA, and it took a while. So I think most people remember the last 2 years, but those first two it was a rough start. So, but they're all like that. You got to grow. And I used to caution people. I said, what you're seeing in year 4 is not the version of the same person that you have in year 1. As a matter of fact, that would scare me if you did.
Yeah.
Is if you got into a job and you didn't learn and grow, and you're the same person as you came into it, I think we might have picked the wrong person. You should be a better version of yourself. That means you're trying to grow and learn how to do things better. So I screwed up a lot. You don't have enough time for me to tell you all the things I messed up as the SMA. But I think I did a lot of great things too.
Trial and error. And last question, SMA. Advice you would give to current folks that are currently serving, officer enlisted, and why or what you believe a little kid from Arkansas, Indiana, whatever part of the states, why you think they should serve in the U.S. Army?
Well, what advice I give for everybody, officers and NCOs, number one, stop talking poorly about the younger soldiers. They said the same thing about you. It's like, matter of fact, when I do this note before him, I said, I'm old enough to be your dad's drill sergeant. We said the same thing about your dad.
Yeah.
I hear a lot like, oh, these soldiers now, they're not very good. And I say, well, my best advice for officers and NCOs is that's your fault. If a soldier doesn't know their job and they're not very good, basically I'm saying you're a bad leader. So it's your job. Train them, make them better.
That's a reflection of you.
Stop talking bad about them. Yeah, don't talk bad about your soldiers. It's a reflection of your leadership. That's probably the biggest advice for the officers and NCOs. And what would I tell somebody about joining the military? I love my life. I would not be standing in this room where I'm at today if it wasn't for the military. I wouldn't. One question I got in an interview one time about 2 years ago. So what would you change in your life? And I went through this list of, I wish I'd invested this thing. I wish I'd done that. I wish, it's a really hard one is, those soldiers that I lost in combat. That's the biggest one. And then after I thought about it for a minute, I said, nothing. All that hardship, all that learning, that pain got me to where I'm at today. And I've got a wife, I got 2 kids. I couldn't be happier. I love my new job. Not that I'm not proud I was in the Army, but I love it. I love what I do. And my fear is that all the pain and the struggles that I went through in my life made me a better person. And it made me a better leader. And it got me these opportunities because I had failure. And then it wasn't the successes. So without those failures, would I have gotten to the point where I was the Sergeant Major of the Army, would I've gotten to be the CEO of AER. So my fear would be if I didn't have that struggle, I wouldn't be here. Um, so my best advice to a young person that says I want to join the military is it's a great life. You're going to meet some incredible people, and then one day you could be a guy from a small town in Jasper, Alabama, and you say you met the last three presidents.
Mhm.
Um, if you'd asked me as a 19-year-old kid joining the Army, would I ever meet or see somebody higher than, I don't know. I don't even know if I talked to the mayor of Jasper, Alabama. I was a young soldier. Um, but you know, I just look back and I said I've had an incredible life, um, and it was all worth it. Just even if I did one day or I did 36 years, the thing I would tell a young version of myself is that it was worth every second.
That's something I really appreciate you from one veteran to another veteran, from one paratrooper to another paratrooper. I really appreciate you. Thanks for your service. Thanks for the impact you had on our military. Really appreciate you. Friends that know you personally, that I spoke to, speak very highly of you. One of them is Command Sergeant Major Rob Abernathy back in Europe, that I consider a friend, a mentor to me indirectly, who had a profound impact on me. And then Mr. Fofana, you probably know Fofana from back in your old days, 101st, and I got some fun when I see him here pretty soon. But I want to say I appreciate you. Thanks for your service. Thanks for what you continue to do in terms of your position as the CEO over at AER, for still serving in different capacity even after you took up the uniform. I want to say thank you again thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. It means a lot to me, and hopefully through our discussion here, somebody can learn something from it. I really appreciate you there, SMA.
No, thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me, and best of luck. Maybe you can have me back a year from now. Ask me new questions.
Absolutely.